Hello, friends. This is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the AlphaList podcast, and today is episode number 100. And for episode number 100, I have a very, 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 very special guest I tried to get or convince to do a podcast for a while. It's Jason Fried, the CEO of Basecamp, and so CEO of Basecamp, founder of 37signals, the company behind Basecamp, founder of Hey.com, founder of Once.com, which is new. Works with our yearly guest DHH. So DHH, David Heinemeier Hinson, is the CTO of Basecamp. Worked with Ryan Singer, who was also on the podcast, and with many other talented people I already had on the show. So Jason, thanks for being my guest.
It's good to finally be here.
So, besides you doing cool products, you kind of are a role model for many bootstrappers and indie hackers out there. And I think you're 25 years in the game. Is that correct?
Yeah, this year our business will be 25 years old. Yeah.
Wow. How does that feel?
Yeah. It feels like a long time, but it also, I don't think about the past that much. So it's not like I'm attached to it that much. I'm more of a kind of now kind of person. But admittedly, it's a long time. I'm old. I feel old. I'm turning 50 this year also. So it's kind of like it's a lot of milestones, let's say.
So you started off with 25 years. How did you start off? I mean, was it like fully bootstrapped from the start, or how did you do that?
When I first started, I had two other business partners, a guy named Ernest Kim and another guy named Carlos Segura. We were all friends, and we started this business, 37signals, together as a web design company. And we each put in $10,000. So we had $10,000 each in savings that we brought to the business. And that's the only money that's ever come into the business that wasn't generated by the business. So you would say we were definitely bootstrapped, even though, of course, it wasn't like starting from zero. We started with $30,000 essentially. And we started with, Carlos had an office already, so we didn't have to pay rent. So we borrowed his office, but we all sat around the same desk. We don't want to spend any money on desks. He had some folding chairs, so we used those. And that's how it all got started. And from that point on, we've always been funded by customers, either web design company customers way back in the day, or software customers today.
And at a certain point, I think Jeff Bezos entered the equation in a way, and then left again, or like what was that?
No, so Jeff bought a piece of the business from David and I in 2006. So 7 years after the business started, Jeff purchased basically the secondary shares, so founder shares from David and I directly. So his money didn't go into the business; it went to me and to David to take some risk off the table. And we sold him some of our ownership, basically. Mm-hmm. But not a penny of his money or anyone else's money has ever gone into the business itself. It's always been generated by customers.
Okay. And at a certain point, you also bought back your shares then, or?
No, I wanted to, but he wasn't interested in selling. so Jeff still owns the same. Well, technically, he owns a little bit less because he had to split up his investment due to something else. But anyway, he still owns essentially the same as he owned before. So we're not able to buy back any shares.
Okay, crazy.
But the thing is, I don't regret the decision. I'm glad that he is involved and was involved then. It's just, of course, a different business today. And I, wish I had more of it than I do. But it still, he owns a
does it
minority
matter
share.
at that size? I mean, does it matter still for you guys?
In what way?
Well, owning more of your business, is it relevant?
It's more of an aesthetic thing for David and I. Just like true, like independence is the most important thing to us. And just to have like literally true, thoroughly true independence is an aesthetic thing that we just can't quite have right now, because Jeff is totally hands off and in the best partner we could ever have, in that he's completely hands off and doesn't get in the way of anything. But still, it'd be nice just not to have anyone else involved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not a financial thing. It's not like I would want more shares back because it would mean more money. It's really not that. That's not the reason that we don't need that. It's just the aesthetics of it for us.
Okay. So like apart from that, you basically have no investors, no board, and no one you owe anything to, no one you have to report to. And I think that's very special, right? With a company of like roughly which size? Like
we have about
in terms of ARR or
well, we don't share that. I can tell you we have about 75 people. Actually, fewer than that. Actually, but low 70s. And then we have we generate what we share is we generate tens of millions of dollars in annual profits. Mm-hmm. So I don't like to talk about revenues, because revenues don't really mean a whole lot, frankly. You can go broke having huge revenue numbers. I like to talk about profits. So we say tens of millions in annual profits. And we've been generating that for a number of years. And we've been profitable every year since we've been in business from year one.
Crazy. And
not as profitable as we are today, but always turn to profit every year.
Okay, cool. And first off, you started doing like client work, agency work, or?
Yes, we were a web design shop. So we were doing, for the first 5 years of the business, we were doing agency work. So primarily design work. So people would already have a website, and we would redesign their website. And this is actually how David and I started working together. Ultimately, well, we kind of started working together because I had a little side project going, but then we began to work on some client work together. And he was the first programmer that we ever had on staff, essentially. Or he wasn't even on staff, really. He was available. Before that, it was just designers. So we would only do visual work. But then we had this one client who wanted us to do some back-end work as well. So I'm like, hey, David, do you want to... We had already done this other side thing together. I'm like, do you want to do this project? And we can like do a whole project. And that was the first sort of client work that had a front end and a back end component that we really got to work together in a way of, we were building a product from scratch for someone else, of course, but that was our first experience together in that capacity.
So I typically ask my guests about their nerd journey and how they got into computing, which doesn't really apply to you, but
I mean, I have a story for sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I sort of kind of liked computers, but not that much. I when I first encountered computers, it was actually like a Commodore 64 and PET computer way back in junior high, I think it was. This was back in the 80s, and I was sort of into it, but not super into it. But then my neighbor, he called me one day. He's like, come over here. This is like in the mid 80s, 87, I think actually it was. He's like, come over here. I'm like, why? He's like, I got to show you something. So I went over to his house, next door neighbor, and he had a Mac. He had a Mac SE. And he had a Mac SE, and he had Microsoft, I think it was Microsoft Flight Simulator on it. And it completely blew my mind. Like the whole thing, from the form factor, from the built-in screen, from the incredibly crisp black and white display, to the sound, to just the integration and the industrial design, the whole thing just blew me away. I was just like, what is this thing? I mean, I'd heard of the Mac, but I'd never seen one really. And that's when I really got interested in computers. And then he showed me like Mac Paint and all the basic early stuff. And just to be able to create on a computer. Before that, creating on a computer for me was, I had to learn how to program basically basic or logo, like 10 go to 30 or whatever that was with the little turtle or whatever it was. That was like the only way. Like if I wanted to draw on a computer, I had to like tell the computer like go 30 and then go and the whole thing, turn right, whatever. And then I could just like actually take this mouse thing and like draw a square. I know this sounds so ridiculous today, but back then it was like a revelation. And so I told my parents I wanted one, and they're like, "Well, it's $5,000. No." I'm like, "Okay, how can I get one?" And eventually I convinced them. They said, like, if you write down 100 reasons why you could use a computer, like, we'll get you one. So like I, made up 100 reasons and eventually got one. And kind of fell in love with making stuff that I needed. So I got into FileMaker Pro. I don't know if you're familiar with FileMaker Pro, but it was like a database system that also allowed you to make your own graphical interface, essentially. And that really got me interested. I also ran a BBS, command line BBS on software called Hermes, which is a Mac-based BBS system, and then something called NovaLink Pro, which was a GUI-based BBS system, which I got to design the interface for again. So I got into making things in graphic design on a computer and building software, not by thoroughly coding it, but by assembling components and then making an interface. And that really thrilled me. And I made some products that I eventually sold shareware, essentially, for $20 a pop, and did that for many years. And that really kind of got me into the whole thing of building software and building products, and realizing that people are willing to pay for something if it's good and useful and clear and has utility and all the things. And you make it easy for them to buy it. And people started sending me checks. And I'm like, this is great. And so that's kind of how I got into computers, essentially.
Okay, cool. And how did you react when David came along, like that crazy Dane, and said, hey, I invented a framework, like I want to publish it? Like, what was your reaction?
He didn't ask me or tell me, really. I think he just kind of did it. I mean, the bigger thing was not Rails, but actually the idea of using Ruby initially for Basecamp. So when we were building Basecamp, he's like, I think we're going to build this. I think we're going to use Ruby. And I didn't know what that was. I'd never heard of it. I'd heard of PHP, which is how we'd been working together. David and I had been working together because of PHP, and the work we'd been doing was in PHP. And then he's like, I'm going to use Ruby. And, look, at the time, I didn't know any better or worse. Basecamp, I didn't know what it was going to become. And again, who am I to say that you're a programmer and I should choose? I don't know how to really program, and I should choose what you should use? No, of course not. So sure, yeah, let's do it, whatever. And then it turned out to work well. And then Rails sort of came out of that eventually. But it wasn't like a conversation. It was going to happen. He was going to open source this thing and build this framework. And it was like, also to our own benefit, because we were going to make other products. And so to not have to redo the basics every time was to our benefit. So it all made sense. I didn't think of the implications, ramifications. I didn't know how big any of this stuff was going to be. I don't go into really anything with expectations. And especially back then, any expectations I would have had would have been blown out of the water by the reality of what occurred. So we're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And frankly, it's really nice to be in that position, to not care because you don't have any expectations. What becomes hard is when you have a business that's doing well and you have expectations, because, to make something now, and if it barely gets off the ground, like 20 years ago, it'd be exciting for anything to get off the ground at all. But now it's like, well, it really has to get off the ground to justify its existence in our time. So I do sort of long for the days of really, truly not caring and just making what we think we want to make. We still try to do that, but it's not an expectation game as much as it's a reality game. Like, we have limited time, limited people, limited resources, and we have a lot of things up in the air. So you really got to figure out what balls are worth juggling. And if something's not pulling its weight, ultimately it's not worth juggling.
And did you ever question it later? I mean, because it's kind of a big thing, and it takes lots of time, and obviously also like generates profits in a way, right? Or influence the product in a positive way. Did you ever question it?
Question the open sourcing of Rails? Like, why not make it a product or something, you mean?
Yeah, that. And David, like, putting in lots of time, I guess that was also a thing.
So I'll answer the second question first, which is David's time. I've never questioned how David spends his time. David's a remarkably efficient, like extraordinarily efficient person and programmer. The amount of stuff that he builds, churns out, works on, has opinions about, blows my mind all the time. And there's never, ever been a situation where something didn't get done because he was doing something else. Just doesn't work that way. So I've never really worried about that. As far as the open source versus pay, it wasn't even my consideration, frankly. Like Rails is really Rails is infrastructure. And our whole stack was built on open source infrastructure. And this is really more of David's thing, which I've totally come along with. I didn't have really an opinion about it early on, but open source is a gift, and a gift you should be giving. And you take this gift as well and you use it. And so we feel like it's important to give back in that same way. So we've open sourced a lot of stuff over the years, many things recently. But I don't think had Rails been a commercial endeavor, I don't think it would have done well. I don't think it would have really achieved what it's achieved, or launched as many companies as it's launched, or launched as many careers as it's launched. Because it takes a different kind of company to build a commercial infrastructure product. And I don't really think that that's not the kind of business we want to run, let's just say. So it was the right decision to open source it. And whether or not I questioned it, I don't think I ever did. But even if I did, I would have been wrong in questioning it. Or you can be right in questioning something, but had I come to a different answer, I would have been wrong. So I'm glad I didn't push that too hard.
And in many companies, that's also why I'm asking towards that direction. In many companies, you have like a bit of a conflict, or at a certain point, you have bigger conflicts between CEO and CTO. Did you guys ever run into trouble? Did you always treat each other's on eye level? Was there ever like a big conflict which you mastered, or was it always okay?
I would say 95% of the time it's always been okay. I think that the biggest conflicts David and I have had are about product direction. Me typically on the I want this to do a little bit more, and him on the I think it should do a little bit less kind of direction. Partially because he's the one who's implementing the doing part. So it's easy for me to dream up the things and to design the things visually. But then it's like, here, make this work. And he's like, well, hang on, there's another way to do this, which is a lot simpler. It's 80%, 90% of the way there, but it's really not going to do these things. And that's kind of where we would battle, which is a good battle to have. And the other thing was probably, I'd say two other things, probably there's some business model decisions that we made along the way that there was some contention around, specifically around Hey, I think, about should Hey be a business product initially or a consumer product initially? So we we had very different opinions about that. And that was kind of a battle for a while. And then I'd say the other one is probably, I think David's sort of come around more to this lately, but he used to be, I would say, more on the side of being data-driven or being evidence-based in terms of looking at the numbers and coming to conclusions early about things. And I've always been someone who's been a bit more, I'd say, intuition and gut-based. And so we would battle a little bit on are we giving this enough time? The numbers would come in and it wouldn't be doing well, or wouldn't be doing as well as maybe you'd hoped, or whatever it would be. And he'd probably want to kill something early or whatever. And I'd be like, well, I don't know. Let's just see. Let's give it some more time. So those are sort of some of the discussions, but there's never been moments where screw this guy, I'm out of here. I don't want this business partner. I mean, you have to ask him how he feels, but that's how I would feel. It's never come to anything like that, but there's been very healthy disagreements and debates and discussions. And I think they've turned out to benefit the business and to strengthen our relationship, frankly. I think it's good that we can go head to head and hold our own and then, be cool with it at the end of the day. And I feel very, 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 very fortunate to have David as a business partner. I know how rare it is to be in a partnership with anybody, marriage, business, whatever, for 20 years now. David and I have been, business is older than David because David came in a little bit after it started, but 20 years we've essentially been partners here, and it's a big deal to have something that lasts that long, and we're very, again, I'll speak for myself. I feel very, very fortunate to have been lucky enough to come into contact with him and to work with him and to continue to get to work with him on a daily basis.
And what would you give our listeners, like mostly our CTOs, as tips to maintain a good relationship with their co-founders and or CEO?
I would say that there probably needs to be a mutual understanding of like, I would say it's tricky. Like David and I also own the business together. So let me kind of parse this out a bit, because you can be a CEO and not own the business, and you can be a CTO and not own the business. You can be CEO and own a piece of the business, and a CTO that doesn't, or a CTO that does. You can be a founder. There's different arrangements here. So all I can speak to is the fact that David and I both own the place. And because of that, we have something else in common, which is we have to see relatively similarly eye to eye enough on the business side and not just battle on the product side. So my instinct on the product side is design and product concept and functionality and the surface area of the thing. And he's like, here's how this thing should be built and structured, and here's what it can do and should do and won't do. And we'll battle there. But like 95% of our perspective on how the business should be run, what we hold dear and valuable and true, our value and independence, that's all the same. So it's hard to really answer that question in a situation where you weren't also business partners, because if you're not business partners, you don't necessarily have to think about the same things. But I do think it's important to find common ground elsewhere, because you're probably going to be battling over product decisions. And if the only interactions you have are fights, it's tough. I remember this is true. Ryan Singer and David, we were fortunate to work with Ryan for close to 20 years. And for a period of time, David and Ryan did not get along, because every time they got together, they argued really hard about product decisions. And I remember David being irritated by this. And I remember kind of getting into it with David, because like I valued Ryan and David hugely. And I said, I think you guys, I think the reason you guys are arguing is because the only time you ever talk is when we get in these heated conversations. Like, other than that, you're not really talking to Ryan socially or like interacting with him. I interact with Ryan all the time on product stuff. So like, I have a different relationship with Ryan than you do. Your relationship with Ryan is just battling. And I can see how if you're just battling with people, then you're just like, I don't want to talk. Every time I get in a conversation, it's a fight. It's like, why is this person so antagonistic? It's actually, neither of them are antagonistic. It's just they happen to only be involved in high value, critical conversations. So what was important for them to do is to begin to talk about other things that were not just those things in which they did and should disagree occasionally, strongly. So that would be my advice for the CTO and CEO, is to find other common ground, other things that you can talk about that are not only critical, high value conversations. If that makes any sense. I know it's a long answer, but I wanted to set the tone a little bit and set the stage, because my experience is going to be a little bit different, given the fact that Dave and I are both business owners and not just like C titles or something like that.
Absolutely. And did it end up working out for the guys?
Yes, definitely. I think David, Ryan is extremely patient and thoughtful individual. Dave is extremely thoughtful, but not very patient. And I think so I think Ryan was able to put up with David more, in a sense, because Ryan's very patient. And David's impatience, I think, frustrated him in those situations. But yeah, they absolutely got over that. and many wonderful years had come after that. But there was that period of time where it was just like, yeah, of course, you only talk when things are on the line. It's going to be hard to, if you disagree, it's going to be hard to find common ground and feel like you want to talk to someone if you only battle.
So, from CTO relationships to product, what are your best kept secrets of creating those stellar products that you create?
Well, first, I appreciate that. Not everybody thinks they're good, of course, which is fun. I was going to write a blog post about something today, so I'll just mention it now and see if the idea is any good. If it is, I'll write this down. It's actually related to a conversation you and I were having before we hit record, which is like building a house or renovating a house. So I was recently renovating a bathroom in my house, and we came upon this decision, my wife and I, which is like, do we want towel bars or hooks on the wall to hang towels? And this is a weird parallel, but I tend to draw these parallels. Whether or not they make sense to others, I don't know. But to me, a hook is a much better product than a towel bar. And it's a much better product because it's way more flexible. It's simpler. It takes up less space. It can receive other things besides towels. Any towel that's hanging on a hook just looks good. It just drapes down. Meanwhile, a towel bar, you can put a towel on a towel bar that doesn't look right because a towel bar sort of encourages you to put it on a certain way. And if you don't get it quite right, it doesn't quite look right. Things can slide off. If there's too much, if it's not evenly distributed, the weight from the towel can slide off the front of the back. You can't put like a shower cap on it also because it doesn't like receive that, where a hook can kind of just grab onto things. It takes up more wall space, the towel bar does, than a hook. So I'm always after trying to make hooks, which are simpler products that, because of their simplicity and their flexibility, they can do more without requiring more. If that makes sense. So that's what I think. If there's I don't even think it's a secret as much as it's just our choice to execute this way, to try to make simpler things that have less surface area, that can be used in many different ways, because they're so simple that they've almost become these generic things. Like, one of the reasons Basecamp took off is not just because it was good for web developers, but it turns out it was great for people who make physical products. Turns out it was good for educators. Turns out it was good for book publishers. It didn't, even though we built it for web designers initially, because that's who we were, it didn't have web design specific features. It turns out any group of people who need to work on something need to communicate in these 4 or 5 different ways and need these 4 or 5 different tools. That's what made it work. And that's what we've tried to do with all of our things, is to make these sort of clever hooks versus towel bars that like take up more room than they need to, do fewer things than they should, and ultimately like require to use them just right. Otherwise, they don't function very well. Does that, by the way, does that resonate at all? Because
absolutely.
Okay, good. So
I just asked myself, like, how do you make sure you're building a hook and not a towel bar? I mean, what is your like, how do you develop that perspective and that view on things to just build simple things or simpler things?
Yeah, part of it is using what you're building as you're building it, and having an intolerance for complexity. Actually, I shouldn't say complexity, because complexity can be a beautiful thing. It's more like having an aversion to convoluted, complicated solutions. Like, complexity can be required in certain situations where there's no alternative, but convoluted, complex, complicated things when they don't need to be really frustrate me. So I just have an internal tuning fork that's just like, that frequency is wrong. This is way more complicated than it needs to be. There's a simpler way here to do this that will resonate more beautifully. If we didn't do these 2 or 3 things, this thing could now do 4 or 5 other things also. That's the thing that's sort of beautiful about something that does less. If you do it right, it can actually do more. The hook can do more than the towel bar, even though the towel bar has more. It has more material. It covers more space. It's more robust in all these other ways, in a sense, but it actually can do less. It does less because it's become so specific that it's only really useful for that one thing. And if you don't use it quite right, it's actually not that useful at all. It's more frustrating than anything. This is why I don't like tools like Jira or very, very specific tools that are so specific that if you don't, like, first of all, if you use them right, you got to use them in a way that's like complicates everything. And if you don't use them right, then you work at all for you. And I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm more in favor of the more generic, simplified things. I think they're better in the end.
But what if you have a towel bar that's heated?
That's an advantage, but it's only going to heat the part that it touches. Now, of course, then you could have one of those heater things, right? That also requires electricity and more wall space and all the things. You can also just say like, it is how I look at heated towels. Like, heated towels are an interesting little novelty that sound great, but like when you get out of the shower, you're usually pretty warm yourself. You're the towel heater. That's how I've always seen it. But yeah, there's, of course, look, there's trade-offs. This is the other important thing, to recognize that in any solution for anything, there are trade-offs that you have to make. And we tend to only think in terms of trade-offs. So like, is this worth it? Well, what are you giving up? What are you getting in return? And for us, the trade-offs need to come out ahead, essentially. And I think that's kind of how we think about these things. So whatever we make, I'll see people comment like, it doesn't do this, doesn't do that. I go, you're absolutely right. It doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. And in my head, I go, because had it done this or that, it wouldn't have been able to do these other things, which are actually more important than the other things it can't do. So if you're just going to take inventory of the things something can't do, it's a pretty cynical way to look at the world versus like, well, why? The thing that I'm always curious about whenever I see any product is like, why they do it that way? I'm always trying to figure out, like, if I was like, can I imagine myself in the room where they made that decision? And would I be able to see why they made that decision? I love that process of breaking down someone else's product and go, they did this because of that. I see why this doesn't do this exactly this way, because it actually gives them more leverage to do these other things now. And I can see how that was an advantage, things like that. So I love at least imagining the decisions behind other people's products, whether or not they're right or not, I don't know. But it's a nice way to practice thinking. So
reverse engineering. Yeah. What do you think about ideas? Like, where do they typically come from initially? Like, is it like, did you wake up at a certain day and say, hey, we're making this new email thing, hey.com, let's do it? Or like, who has the idea? And on the way, then there are like techniques like product discovery, where you ask your users, where you ask your customers about their ideas, their input, for their input. What are your thoughts around that? Does it make sense, or?
Well, a couple things. So first thing is, where do the ideas come from? And I think the only honest answer is, I have no idea. I don't think any of us really know where any of this stuff comes from. It just appears. It just bubbles up into your head. Like, where'd it come from? You could say, well, I was thinking about it yesterday. Well, why were you thinking about it yesterday? Like, you just trace it back a few steps and it goes into this like invisible cloud of mystery. Who knows, right? But so I think instead of ideas coming from somewhere, I tend to think that things unfold and present themselves. So I'll give you a specific example, and then I'll answer the other question you asked at the end. With Hey, the email, well, like, where'd that idea come from? Well, we didn't set out to make an email app, actually. We set out to make a new version of HighRise, which is our CRM tool. And as we began to explore some ideas around HighRise, a lot of them ended up revolving around email. And we're just like, you know what? I wish I had this for all my emails. Like, why just my like important business emails? Like, why can't I do this with like wait a second. And I remember going to David. I was working on this idea with a guy named Jonas Downey, and we were playing with this. He was one of our designers at the time. We were playing with this, and I remember going to David and going, "Hey, David, I think we have a new idea here. I think we should build an email app." And like that, so that was a fun conversation because like we didn't, and I'm like, let me show you why. Like here's some screens we came up with, and but we didn't set out for that. So again, that unfolded. It unfolded through something else, through an exploration of something else. I like it when things do that. And just like the towel bar example, I mean, what a weird way to think about software products, but is it? Or is it actually the right way to think about software products? Like here's a situation. And if you can draw a parallel to it, maybe it helps you reveals something else, or it exposes a different approach. Then in my head, moving forward, I can think like, is this a hook or is this a towel bar? Like in my own head. And it's now a framework for me to think about things. I forget the second. What was the second part of that?
Product discovery. What do you think about like asking users?
So we will occasionally interview users way after we've launched something. I don't believe in interviewing people ahead of time. I don't believe in asking people what they think of something that doesn't exist, or what would they use if they could, or how much they would pay if this, that, or the other. I'm far more a fan of doing that work myself and then presenting something that we think is good, and then letting people use it in the real world, in their real situations, under real conditions, and then asking them different questions about like their scenarios, and not asking them about our software, but like asking them about like, what do you struggle with? Or in your given day, like what are the things that frustrate you about your job, or whatever it might be. And from those insights, you figure out ways to maybe improve your product. But I don't like to put a feature in front of somebody or a flow and say like, does this make sense? Like, in what capacity does that, I mean, people don't think about whether or not something makes sense, like in the abstract. I mean, they'll give you an answer because you're asking them the question and they're polite and they want to help. But I don't think that that's really where the insights really come from. I think the insights come from understanding what people are dealing with outside of your product. And then it's your job to take those insights and come up with something that you think might improve their situation if they use your product. So that's my sense on that.
And your thoughts around like evidence-based product building and metrics. You mentioned that you're a bit skeptic, and David is more like let's say evidence-based or numbers driven.
I think David's come around. What I was kind of saying is, I think David's come around to the intuition gut side of things. Mm-hmm. I think he's seen. We've done some tests over the years, and it's interesting how often the thing you sort of thought was going to work tends to actually work out pretty well, or well enough. At least for us, it has. And so I think that he's just become more of a like, trust your gut. Let's just do what we want to do. Like that's more fun anyway, kind of person. I've never been very metrics driven. I don't really like looking at metrics. I don't think a lot of people have any idea what to do with the numbers. I think that they generate the numbers and they look at the numbers and they get an answer like 28%. And it's like, okay, what if only 28% of the people use this feature? Like they'll measure like how many people use this, or we launched this new thing, how many people use it? It's like, what if it's 16? What if it's 13? What if it's 19? What if it's 12 and a half? Like, what does it really matter? Like, why are you actually doing this? And my sense is that this is an unconventional opinion, but my feeling is everything comes down to human judgment in the end. That you can be presented with all the numbers you want, and at the point of making a decision, there are thousands of things that are bearing down on that decision and shifting you in one way or the other. It's not just the numbers that are sitting there in front of you. It's something else too, and 1,000 other things you don't know either. And if you're asking a human to make a decision, you're asking someone to make a judgment call, to make a gut call in the end. And you're acknowledging the fact that if a human's you should acknowledge the fact that if a human's making a call, you don't know where that call is coming from ultimately. if you're just going to go by the numbers, then humans should not make the decisions. Then let computers make the decisions. But I don't think we're quite comfortable with letting computers make the decisions yet. So if we still want humans to make the decision, what we're actually asking is, what do you think? We're not saying, what do you know? We're saying, what do you think? And that brings to bear, again, gut, judgment, experience. These are, again, mysterious things, but they are the essence, in my opinion, of most decision making. And I think that we are trying to be honest about that by saying that we're driven by that primarily, versus saying that we're a data-driven company or whatever. And I don't believe any company really is truly that. Maybe there are a few, but I think in many cases, it's still a human judgment call, and we're just comfortable admitting the fact that that's how we make decisions.
Yeah, sometimes numbers help for orientation, right?
Yeah, they're an input. They're an input, but again, the thing is that because they're a clear input that you can see them, people tend to put a lot of weight in them. But I put a lot of weight in the things you can't see. That just because you can't see it, it then becomes hard to value it. I think a lot of people have a hard time valuing the things they can't see. My sense is, I think like the thing is, if you really step back and ask, like, okay, so company A, you're going to go hire an executive, right? You're going to hire a new CTO. Well, why'd you pick one person over the other person? Was it a data-driven decision? I guarantee you it was not. Hiring is not a data-driven decision. You talked to somebody. You got a sense of their experience. You had conversations with them about things. You got a sense of what their judgment is like. Like, you hired them based on their humanity and the experiences they've had as a human being and their professional experiences. But this is a sum total of a bunch of mysteries. And if you're just going to hire someone who can read a spreadsheet or make a decision based on numbers, you don't need a human being for that. If it's just like a pile of numbers, give that to a computer, give that to ChatGPT or whatever. Let ChatGPT or the spreadsheet or the algorithm make that call. But if you're hiring a human, you're valuing the humanness there somewhere. And I think the value in the humanness is the unknown mystery experience judgment of someone's career. The fact that people are different because they've had different experiences and different life stories and different judgment calls, and they've seen different things. And you're trying to find the right person that you think has the collection of those things, even though you don't know what most of them ultimately are, that's going to help them make good judgment calls moving forward. And I think hiring is just also more judgment calls. So you want to hire someone who has good judgment so they can make more good judgment calls about future people's judgment. I think that's the reality, even though it's not the scientific business method that people want to subscribe to. I just think that that's a false method, frankly. So that's my take.
So is your hiring then mostly gut-based or intuition-based, or like how do you make sure
I think all hiring is what I'm coming to here to say. I think all hiring is gut and intuition based. Now, if you're like, you can have bad gut and bad intuition. If you hire someone who's totally unqualified, that's a problem too. So you got to people have to clear a certain bar of competency. But if you have 5 or 6 or 10 people who've cleared that bar of competency and they're all equally good, and you got to hire one of them, which is ultimately kind of how it turns out. Like, you're going to hire someone based on intangibles, like maybe they have more experience. What does that mean? If you say, like, people hire all the time based on experience, like, this is a primary hiring metric, experience, years of experience. What does that even mean? Well, it means they've seen a lot of things and they've been involved with a lot of things. Like, how mysterious is that? Super mysterious. But there's value in the fact that they've been around and seen things and made calls and had circumstances and been responsible for their decisions or seen how other people make, like, all this stuff is what experience is. And that's what people tend to hire on. And so that's my point of view, is that everybody hires this way. again, getting over a certain bar of competency. So when we hire, there's a certain bar of competency. The handful of finalists tend to have to do a project for us that we pay them for. On the design side, for example, they'll do a design project for us. On the code side, they'll do some code for us. These are not riddles. These are actual projects, and we pay them for the work, for about a week's worth of work. And that helps us evaluate what they see. Like, they only have a week, which is not a lot of time. We give them more work than they can do. And you want to see what decisions they made, like why they do this and why they do that. And those are the questions I ask. I'm not picking the person who delivered the best project. If your project was terrible, that's a big problem. But if your project was pretty good, we have an interesting conversation about your project, and I get to understand why you made the decisions, or why you think you made the decisions that you made, how you approach this problem, why you decided to do this and not that, and put this aside because you didn't have enough time, but you decided to focus on this instead. Those are the questions I'm interested in. And that's how we ultimately make decisions. Like, you know what? This person has a good way of approaching the problems and approaching the work and thinking through the things and making good trade-offs and making good calls. Like, that to me is more valuable than a pixel perfect rendering of some screen where, like, it looks great, but they can't explain to me why they did what they did.
And what do you think about attitude versus experience in hiring?
I think attitude's a huge part of it too. So again, it's another like squishy, mysterious thing. Like, how do you evaluate attitude? Well, you talk to someone, you get a feel for like one of the things we do in this review of the work at the end is to critique the work. Even if we agree with it, I can critique my own work. Like, there's things I did that I wish I would have done better, or whatever. So you poke and you prod and you see how someone responds to that. Like, how do they handle criticism? Do they roll with it? Are they defensive? Can you tell that it bruised their ego? What's their attitude? What's their general attitude like about rolling with the work? Can they riff on the fly? Can they admit someone else's idea is better than theirs? Like, can they defend their idea if they really believe in it? Like, we're looking for all those things. So attitude's a huge part of it. I like to think that we hire people with very high character, people who are not egoless, because that's not true. People have egos, but like, who are really interested in just doing really good work with good people. And they're not interested in taking all the credit or getting all the credit or having their name all over it, but they just want to do really good work and really hone their craft. And that's a certain attitude. There's other people who are really all about me, and that's not the kind of people we want to hire. So yes, those are decisions we make.
Cool. Yeah, would love to sneak into a hiring process at 37 Signals. Can imagine you're quite challenging in that process.
We're careful. We don't hire very often.
Yeah.
And people who we hire tend to stick around for many years. So I think we've gotten very, very good at it. And I think it's because we evaluate people differently than on some metrics-based hiring scale or something like that. Like, I don't think people are made of metrics.
Cool. So we slowly have to come to the end, and I'd still like to hear it's the year 2024, and I'd like to hear your view of productivity these days. Like, what are your top tips for folks to be, let's say, more productive, waste less time? What did you learn recently?
Well, the best way to get a lot of things done is to have very little to do, first of all. So I think taking on fewer projects at once is a great way to be productive. If you take on more than you can chew and deal with, and you end up getting frustrated and you leave a lot of untied knots and loops, that's the first thing. And I think a lot of people tend to try to do too many things at once. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is something we do at an organizational level, which is that we don't estimate how long something is going to take. We tell the thing how long it's going to take. So we have what we call appetites, not estimates. We have a 3-week appetite for this feature. We are only willing to spend 3 weeks on this. Let's figure out the 3-week version of that feature. So that prevents you from going on and on and on and putting more time into something and saving face, and after you've already blown your deadline by 100%, now you're in week 6, well, you're not going to give up now because you've already spent twice as much time on it, so let's put another week in. And before you know it, like, this is how everything runs in many companies. And that's because estimates don't work. Humans are terrible estimators. And then you run into these human nature things about saving face and the whole thing. So we just like try to eliminate that right off the bat by saying, we're only willing to give this. It's like a budget. Like, we only have this much money. In this case, we only have this much time to give to this thing. So let's make the most of it. That really is probably the best thing. If you're going to pick one thing, it's to stop estimating and to start assigning appetites or budgets to things instead. That, I think, will keep more people more honest and allow people to get more stuff done in a year's worth of time than pretty much anything else. Now, unless you say the appetite is a year, I'm talking about like shorter appetites, and stick to them. And you'll train yourself to get better and better at being able to see the shorter version of something, or you'll force yourself to figure out how to make more hooks and fewer towel bars this way. This is practice, and the first few times it's hard, but it's a good skill to develop. So it's a bit abstract. I know I'm being a bit abstract here, but that's the advice I have for people.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So let's. I still have a little test for you of how much of a techie you are.
Oh God.
You know Ruby gems, I guess, from David, and
Sure.
and David was involved building a Ruby gem called Timecop, which you typically use for testing your code, and like traveling back in time in your tests. And he actually submitted a pull request that has been denied because it had a crazy side effect. It actually made people travel in time, and we now have the chance to travel back in time just with that, using David's PR, which he still kind of saved after it has been deleted. And we now travel back into the year 1999 when you started off 37 Signals. And we can observe yourself for a while, like you building great designs with your co-founders, and maybe have like tiny ideas about SaaS already. And building great SaaS products, and you now have the chance to whisper something into young Jason's ears. What would it be?
It's funny. I just wrote a post about this. I hate that question. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. I hate the question because young Jason wouldn't have listened to old Jason. So it's like old Jason could whisper all sorts of things into young Jason's ear, and young Jason was a young punk who thought he knew everything and had no interest in listening to anybody else. And that is why we built the company that we built. I actually think that I will give you an answer though also, but I think people would be better served just doing what the hell they want to do versus constantly looking for other people's advice. So I think a lot of people just aren't really good at taking advice anyway, and they don't really understand the advice that's being given, and they're not even ready to do it. And frankly, if you want to really learn something, you've just got to do it yourself. I think business is a lot more like playing the guitar than people give it credit for. For example, if you want to get good at playing the guitar, you don't read books about it. I mean, you can read all the books in the world about guitar, but if I ask someone if there are two people and they had a year, and the first person could read every book ever written on a guitar, and the second person could just read no books, know nothing about music theory, and just pick up a guitar and start to mess around with it, who's going to be better in a year? The person who played the instrument. And I think business is the same thing. A lot of people are looking for advice and mentorship and that one piece of knowledge they didn't have, and they want to read the next book and the next book. Just make something. So my advice to myself, even though I this is what I did, but this is the advice I'd give to someone else, let's say, who is 20, who might want to listen to 50-year-old Jason. Just go make something. Just go make stuff. That's how you get better at all these things, is to make things. Make a business, make a product, make hiring decisions, to do the work. That's how you get better at it. You don't get better at it by studying what other people have done.
Great. Thanks a lot.
All right. Sure.
Is there one thing you'd love to unlearn, actually?
Wow, that's a great question. Really, really good question. I've never been asked that before, and I've never heard anyone ask that, and I think it's great. I'm trying to think of the answer now. Something I wish to unlearn. I'm sure there's certain tendencies I have that probably have not served me well, but I can't say I have an immediate answer to that. I will tell you that there's something that I wish I was still good at that I'm not as good at anymore, which is a little bit of a variation on your question, but similar, I think. I haven't been enough in the code, in the HTML and the CSS specifically, over the past few years like I used to be. So I've lost some skills there. I've atrophied there. And I'm actually a bit embarrassed by it, frankly, and frustrated by it. So one of the things I want to do this year is to really get back into that and really pick up, because CSS especially has really progressed significantly. And if you're out of that world for a few years, like it's pretty easy to like really fall behind. So I've really fallen behind there. So I would say, I wish I hadn't unlearned. This is a stretch to answer your question, but
kind of.
I wish I would have paid more attention to the progression of CSS. But what happened is that we ended up hiring designers who I began to delegate more to. And because of that, I did not do the work as much. And so I know less about it today. So I don't like that. So I'm going to do something about that this year. Is that an okay answer? I mean,
it's an okay answer. It's not a precise answer to my question, but
I don't really have a good answer for that other question. It's a very good question, though. I think it's actually a good question to ask someone else about me, which is, what do you wish that he wasn't like? That's kind of maybe they would probably have a pretty clear answer.
I'll ask David then.
Ask David,
so,
please.
Thanks a lot for the interview, Jason. Was lots of fun, and yeah, let's start building more hooks instead of towel bars, right?
There we go. I got to write that blog post today or tomorrow now that it's out there in the ether.
Great. Thanks
cool.
a lot.
This is great. Thank you for having me. It's really fun to talk to you.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.